It was an ordinary autumn day. On the 14th of October 2016, around 9 o'clock in the morning, the 46-year-old Robert Lawson arrived at a vacant lot in the northern part of Mayfield district. He planned to build garages and had already cleared the property of old metal. Robert had been here several times before and had not noticed anything strange or suspicious. None of the neighbors had reported unusual incidents either. The first day passed quietly. Robert carefully removed the top layer of soil with hand tools and regularly checked the levelness of the property. On this day, he noticed nothing unusual. The next morning, the 15th of October, Lawson returned early to the property. Around 8:30, he placed markers and stretched a measuring cord to evenly align the foundation of the future building. In hard-to-reach places, he worked with a shovel. Everything went normally until Robert suddenly heard a quiet sound at 9:10. At first he could not understand where it came from and what it even was. A moment later the sound repeated. Now it was clearly muffled screams. They came from the ground. At first, Lawson thought of an animal that had fallen into a trap, or a pipe that he had accidentally damaged during the work. But soon his concern intensified, and he decided to check the suspicious spot. At 9:15, Robert began carefully digging exactly where the sound came from. The first centimeters of soil looked normal, but somewhat deeper Robert discovered a dense layer of sand and gravel, such a mixture he had not seen on neighboring properties before. Assuming that someone had previously set up an improvised dump here, he continued digging carefully. After 10 minutes, Lawson's shovel struck a plywood partition that had obviously been intentionally installed by someone. The earth surface above it had been carefully compacted. At first glance, no traces of earthwork were visible. When Robert removed the plywood pieces and shone a flashlight into the chamber, he saw a human hand and heard a barely perceptible call for help. Shaken, Robert stepped back a few steps to ensure that the earth would not collapse. Then he began to clear the passage as carefully as possible, trying not to harm the person who was trapped. At 9:35, the largest part of the construction was removed. Under the earth lay a woman. Her face was almost completely covered with dirt and sand. She was barely breathing, but was still alive. At this moment, the woman tried to get up, but her legs and part of her body were still densely covered with earth.
Robert asked for police and paramedics to be sent to the location immediately and waited for their arrival.
The rescue service and police arrived at the scene 12 minutes later. They found the woman in critical condition. Weak breathing, dehydration, and a very weak pulse. They provided first aid and immediately took her to the hospital. At this point, her identity and the reason why she was under the earth remained a mystery. The police immediately cordoned off the scene and began investigating the situation. The soil was clearly piled up and mixed, with signs that the pit had been prepared in haste, specifically to hide a person. The Lawson was temporarily prohibited from conducting construction work, and criminal experts were called in who began a detailed examination of the area. What appeared to be a random discovery began to take on the features of a serious crime. It became clear someone had tried to bury the woman alive, and only a lucky coincidence had saved her life. However, many questions remained unanswered. Who had done this and why exactly here? While the police officers conducted the first investigative measures, Robert gave brief statements and left the location on the instruction of law enforcement authorities. All that could be established on the first day was the fact that a living woman was found under the earth. The police kept the details of her condition and the causes of the incident strictly secret. At the end of the 15th of October, it became clear. The story was much more complicated and serious than it initially seemed. The police ordered an additional investigation with ground-penetrating radar and criminal technicians to completely examine the area. Already in the evening, the investigation group met to discuss the first results. But there were still more questions than answers. What exactly had happened on this vacant lot? How long had the woman spent under the earth? And most importantly, who had brought her there and why? Only one thing could be stated definitively. This woman was not there voluntarily. And if Robert Lawson had not begun his work exactly on this day and exactly at this location, perhaps no one would ever have learned of her fate. The case developed rapidly, and at this point no one suspected that the discovery of the woman on the vacant lot would initiate the beginning of a much larger investigation. On the 16th of October 2016, representatives of the Mayfield County Sheriff's Office officially confirmed the admission of a woman to the hospital who had been rescued the day before from a self-built pit. She was admitted to the district hospital with signs of exhaustion and dehydration. According to the rescue services, the victim was conscious but could not make detailed statements. The investigation group assigned to clarify the circumstances established preliminary data that was compared with the federal database for missing persons. At this stage, it turned out that the victim's identity matched the information about the missing Emily Harper, who had left her workplace in June 2008 and had not returned home. According to archive data, Harper disappeared at the age of 21. The report of her disappearance came from relatives 2 days after she had stopped answering phone calls. In official search file number 08-3279, it was noted that search measures continued for several months, but no traces of the missing person were found. At the end of 2009, the case was factually suspended due to lack of evidence. Subsequently, Harper did not appear in police reports, and many acquaintances assumed that she had died. Official status: missing. Photos, fingerprints, and other information were forwarded to the national database. But since 2008, there had been no inquiries or confirmed leads about her whereabouts in the registers. The press release issued by the Sheriff's Office on the 16th of October contained only formal information about the recent incident on the vacant lot. The police department declined to comment on details of Harper's condition, stating that additional verifications were necessary. In response to press inquiries, a representative of the sheriff's office explained that the investigation was being conducted within the framework of criminal proceedings for attempted murder or serious bodily harm, but did not specify whether there were suspects. The published information was limited to the fact that the found woman had indeed been on the missing persons list for more than 8 years and had no contact with relatives, friends, or official agencies. Details about the reasons for her disappearance and how she had spent all this time were not disclosed. On the evening of the 16th of October, the investigation group focused on analyzing 3 key questions that would determine the further course of the case. First question: who kidnapped Emily Harper and what goals did the kidnapper pursue, if there was one? Second question: how could Harper physically survive during such a long absence, and why did she not make obvious attempts to contact the outside world? Third question: what exactly prompted the potential perpetrator to take the risk and bury the victim alive after so many years since her disappearance? All data collected during the initial investigation pointed to a clearly violent nature of the incident, but the criminal investigators did not have answers to the key questions. The criminal technical department had been on the property since the morning of the 16th of October. Their reports mentioned extracted soil samples, fragments of plywood panels, and traces that indicated recent digging within a radius of about 4 square meters. It was established that the grave had a layer of compacted fill from various soil types, which excluded the version of an accidental collapse or domestic accident. According to the specialists, the analyzed evidence did not allow for a definitive determination of the exact time periods when the soil had been rearranged. Therefore, laboratory tests were required. The question of the existence of accomplices or other persons who had access to the area remained open. Statements from relatives of Emily Harper were not available to the public as of the 16th of October. According to police reports, family representatives had agreed to questioning and did not intend to give interviews. The police did not disclose details about possible conflicts, debts, or interpersonal problems that were connected with Harper in the time before her disappearance. The duty investigator of the district department explained to journalists that it was too early to draw final conclusions about the motives of the crime, since a complete reconstruction of the events of the past years was required. The statements of Emily Harper herself remained under medical confidentiality, as she was under medical observation in a state of extreme exhaustion, and gave no clear description of what had happened. By the 17th of October 2016, the investigators had gathered enough material to create a clear picture of the main participants in the case. All important information about the victim, the person who had found her, and those who might have been connected with the crime scene were carefully documented and organized. Emily Harper was born on the 22nd of January 1987. At the time of her disappearance in June 2008, she was 21 years old and worked as a waitress in the cafe Maple Corner in Mayfield. Relatives and colleagues described her as responsible and conflict-free, without problems with the law or debts. Emily disappeared on the 3rd of June 2008, when she did not return home after her shift at the cafe. The parents contacted the police 2 days later after their daughter had stopped responding to calls. Despite thorough searches and announcements in the federal missing persons database, no traces of Emily were found at that time. All hypotheses about her whereabouts proved to be false, and at the end of 2009, the search operations were discontinued. Now, after 8 years of absence, Emily was in the hospital in poor physical and mental condition and was unable to report in detail what had happened to her. Robert Lawson was 46 years old, owned an auto repair shop, Lawson Auto Repair, and several properties in the Mayfield district. At the beginning of October 2016, he acquired the wasteland to expand his business. Exactly there, he discovered on the 15th of October during construction work the underground structure in which Emily Harper was located. Lawson immediately called emergency 911 and helped the police with the inspection of the property. According to police reports, he had never met Harper before and was considered exclusively as a witness. The investigators saw no reason to suspect him of involvement in the crime. The third person who drew the investigators' attention was the 54-year-old Jacob Wheeler, a former employee of the local post office, who lived about 200 meters from the place where Emily was found. Wheeler had no criminal background and was not involved in illegal activities, but neighbors noticed his withdrawn character and his unwillingness to communicate with people. He was registered as a small tax debtor, but this did not connect him directly with the Harper case. The investigators considered him for now as a possible witness, but decided to conduct additional checks due to the proximity of his house to the crime scene. The investigators' interest was also aroused by the fact that the police had already been on this property in the spring of 2009 after an anonymous call about a suspicious grave. The law enforcement authorities found nothing suspicious at that time and considered the report to be false. No excavations or checks with special equipment were carried out, and there were no indications in the archives of a connection with Harper's disappearance. Now the investigation focused on clarifying possible connections between the property where Emily was found, the adjacent possessions, and the events of 8 years ago. New questions emerged when it turned out that Harper's discovery site was literally next to residential houses. Lawson was beyond suspicion, but the investigators did not exclude that Wheeler might possess valuable information or indirectly know about the events. The police refrained for now from public theories about who might have held Emily Harper for 8 years and why the perpetrator was now trying to get rid of her in such a cruel way. All details were carefully protected, and the investigation group planned to begin with questioning the residents and a more thorough examination of the property's history. Each of the 3 participants, Emily Harper, Robert Lawson, and Jacob Wheeler, could play a key role in the complete reconstruction of the chronology of this mysterious and disturbing case. On the 18th of October 2016, the investigation group met for an internal meeting to discuss several possible scenarios of the incident. In the prepared report, Three main versions were considered, each of which required separate measures to verify the facts. The main difficulty was that Emily Harper, who was still in the hospital, was unable to make clear and detailed statements. In parallel, the police had found no direct evidence pointing to a specific suspect. The first version of the investigators assumed that Harper might have become the victim of a long-past conflict or personal antipathy that not even her relatives knew about. To check this hypothesis, archive materials were reviewed again, and a circle of her former acquaintances and colleagues was questioned again. Two people came into focus: Emily's former boyfriend and one of her colleagues from the cafe, Maple Corner, who had mentioned an unpleasant situation that had occurred shortly before Harper's disappearance. However, witness statements from those years did not indicate a direct threat to life, and in 2008, no official accusations were made against anyone. Now the investigators faced the task of finding out whether there were hidden motives or conflicts that could lead to kidnapping and long-term captivity. The second version assumed that Harper had become the victim of a perpetrator who might have acted systematically. For this purpose, criminal investigators and analysts examined cases of missing persons in the region in the last 10 years, especially cases that were never closed. Nothing similar to Emily's case could be found. Most cases of disappearance were connected with teenagers on the run or family conflicts. Although the hypothesis of a serial kidnapper was not confirmed by anything concrete, the investigators did not exclude the possibility that the perpetrator acted alone and used an extremely unusual method of capture and subsequent elimination of the real victim. Similar schemes were also checked in neighboring districts, but matches had not been found so far. The third discussed hypothesis assumed that Harper might have left voluntarily and could have lived hidden from everyone, and after many years encountered circumstances or a person that forced her to flee or that tried to get rid of her this way. But medical evaluations that documented severe physical consequences and clear signs of violent captivity made this version unlikely. Additionally, databases showed not a single case where she could have appeared under another name or in another place. The main puzzle remained where exactly Emily had spent the 8 years. Doctors reported that she could so far only describe her captivity fragmentarily and only mentioned a locked room and the long absence of daylight. The investigators determined that these details did not yet provide a complete picture. Additional difficulties were caused by the absence of traces of struggle at Harper's discovery site. Criminal investigators found only fragments of wooden structures and compacted soil, which provided no precise data about the number or identity of those involved in the crime. Blood was not found at the crime scene. Back to us. The investigators brought in 5 more experts for a more thorough inspection of the area, including neighboring buildings. A problem was also the frequent change of owners of the wasteland from 2010 to 2016, which is why it was not yet clear who exactly could have had access to it. New questions also emerged about the case from 2009, when the police had already checked this area after an anonymous report about a possible grave. In the re-examined old report, it turned out that the check was carried out superficially, without the use of special equipment and even without elementary probing. This suggested that a hidden object could have existed already then, in which Harper was held, or that it was set up later. Another direction of the investigation was the version that the perpetrator might live nearby and might have just now decided to get rid of the victim, possibly out of fear of new checks. For this purpose, the investigators decided to question the residents of houses within a radius of 300 meters to find out whether they had noticed unusual activities or nighttime work near the property. The investigations therefore initially favored no version. Each had its shortcomings and contradicted the known facts. Internal reports indicated a high degree of uncertainty and the need for further questioning, a more thorough examination of the surrounding areas and the review of regional archives. Representatives of the prosecutor's office requested an acceleration of evidence collection, as the fact of attempted murder was already proven by material evidence. At the end of the day, during an operational meeting, the task was set to find direct evidence linking Harper's abduction to a specific person. The list of measures included a more detailed inspection of commercial buildings and cellars in the area. At this point, none of the residents, including Jacob Wheeler, came under direct suspicion. However, the investigators continued to carefully examine the area adjacent to his property, aware that any new information about who had held Emily Harper captive all these years could fundamentally change the course of the investigation. On the 19th of October 2016, the investigators received the results of the first forensic examinations conducted on the wasteland. The report stated that soil samples and plywood fragments showed traces of impacts that had occurred 2 to 3 days before Emily Harper's discovery. Weak fingerprints were found on the wood fragments that did not belong to Robert Lawson. On the same day, police intensified checks of the area around the wasteland, including the property of Jacob Wheeler, who lived about 200 meters from the crime scene. The main purpose of the visit was to confirm or exclude his possible connection to the incident. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, representatives of the sheriff arrived at Wheeler's and asked for permission to inspect his house and property. Wheeler calmly agreed to cooperate and assured that he had not left his house at night since he had no means of transportation. He claimed that the wasteland had never interested him and presented documents confirming that he had made no renovations to the house. The first inspection revealed nothing suspicious inside the house, garage, or attic. However, during the external examination of the property, the police officers noticed an unusual crack in the foundation of an outbuilding behind the house. Signs of a camouflaged entrance drew attention. Wheeler explained that he had not used this building for a long time and had not paid attention to the defects. One of the experts used an infrared scanner and discovered a hidden cavity under the floor. The investigators asked Wheeler when he had last checked the foundation, to which he answered evasively and gave no specific timeframes. With sufficient grounds for a more detailed check, the investigators called the forensic brigade. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they arrived with a search warrant and began opening the floor of the building. After removing several boards and parts of the concrete ceiling, they discovered a hidden underground room with a height of about 1.5 meters. In it, the operatives found elements that did not correspond to an ordinary storage room. Metal chains, fasteners on the walls, remains of insulating material, and a ventilation pipe leading outside. This room was clearly intended for the long-term imprisonment of a person. During the preliminary inspection, which lasted about half an hour, the detectives found that some surfaces had no dust, empty water containers, and a mattress covered with polyethylene. Wheeler could not give clear explanations for the origin of these things and insisted that the room had been left by previous owners. The specialists took fiber samples from the mattress as well as biological material from the walls and fasteners for later DNA analysis. The only question remained whether this room was directly connected to Emily Harper. The fact that specialized devices were present already indicated possible violent imprisonment. The police officially placed Wheeler's house under control and temporarily restricted his access to the interior. He himself maintained outward calm and continued to claim that he had never used this room and knew nothing about its purpose. Nevertheless, the discovery of the hidden room became a decisive turn in the investigation. For the first time, there was a specific person on whose property clear signs of victim imprisonment were found. What evening? The district prosecutor's office confirmed that the materials collected by the investigators formed the basis for transitioning to a new phase of the investigation. Now the experts had to determine whether Emily Harper had actually spent a significant part of her absence in this room.
For this, they had to wait for laboratory results, which were expected within 3 days.
The sheriff's office did not rush with major statements, but emphasized that the discovery of such a room significantly changed the nature of the investigation. Until now, police had relied only on assumptions about an unknown perpetrator. But now there was a concrete lead. The investigators planned questioning of Wheeler and obtained a search warrant for all his possessions as well as the seizure of his computer and phones. The leadership of the investigation group decided on the evening of the 19th of October to immediately compare Wheeler's statements with the facts and medical records of Harper, who had mentioned staying in a closed room at the hospital. No one was rushing to file official charges yet. But the existence of such a room clearly contradicted Wheeler's statements and indicated direct restriction of the victim's freedom. The investigators established that the checks in 2009 did not involve private houses in the area, but were limited only to the wasteland territory. That is exactly why no traces of kidnapping could be found at that time. Now the investigators faced the task of determining how Harper could have been brought from the hidden room to the pit on the wasteland, and whether only Wheeler or other people were involved. Thus, the events of the 19th of October became a turning point. The found evidence spoke of a carefully prepared place of captivity and forced the investigators to focus their attention precisely on Jacob Wheeler. Any new information could now radically change the further development of events. On the 23rd of October 2016, the Mayfield County Sheriff's Office conducted an expanded meeting with the participation of the prosecutor, heads of investigation departments, and forensic experts. The meeting discussed the results of examinations, first DNA tests, and updated data on Emily Harper's condition. The documents allowed a better understanding of the circumstances of the crime, and the main suspect of the investigation became increasingly clear as Jacob Wheeler. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, the detectives received information from the forensic laboratory about the partial decryption of an encrypted area on Wheeler's external hard drive. The specialist reported that part of the files had been deleted, but automatic copies remain that were created in various years between 2008 and 2015. A preliminary analysis showed the presence of text notes and possible images, whose complete content, however, required additional time for recovery. The fact that such materials existed was evaluated by the investigators as weighty evidence for possible systematic recording of some actions, presumably related to Emily Harper's imprisonment. By midday of the same day, the doctors reported that Emily was gradually getting better and could make new, albeit fragmentary, statements. She mentioned a daily schedule, regular food deliveries, and periodic replacement of lamps in the room where she was held captive. She also told that she sometimes heard movements and sounds from above but saw no other people. These details matched the results of the inspection of Wheeler's basement, but the physicians did not yet allow a complete questioning, so as not to endanger the patient's health. At 1400 hours, the investigators additionally inspected the backyard of Wheeler's house. It was established that the ventilation pipe leading to the basement was specially covered with a metal plate that, judging by the condition of the fasteners, had been installed long ago. The investigators concluded that the ventilation system had been thought out in advance for the long-term imprisonment of a person. Additionally, signs of a filled-in depression were discovered that could have served as a hiding place or additional entrance. Soil samples were taken on site for further examination. After the inspection, the police conducted another formal interrogation of Wheeler. He continued to claim he knew nothing about the origin and purpose of the underground room. Regarding the ventilation plate, he testified that it was left over from previous repairs, but could not provide documentary evidence of this. To more precise questions about why there were no official documents about construction work, Wheeler gave no clear explanations. On the 24th of October, the investigators focused on examining new materials from the electronic files. In this text notes, the daily routine of a certain person was mentioned, descriptions of living conditions and precautionary measures like noise shielding at night. Several entries obviously coincided with the period of Emily Harper's disappearance in the years 2008 to 2009. This data was not yet definitively verified, but the investigators suspected that the records reflected a planned system of capturing a person, possibly Harper herself. Toward evening, the preliminary results of the second phase of DNA expertise arrived. The blood and hair samples found on the metal fastenings in the basement belonged with high probability to Emily Harper. This became an important confirmation that she had been in Wheeler's basement under conditions that clearly implied violent deprivation of liberty. Investigators determined that it was impossible for such traces to have gotten into this room by accident. On the 25th of October, the detectives gathered for a closed meeting to finally summarize the collected evidence. It was decided that the basement, the ventilation system, the DNA data, and the found records from the hard drive pointed to Jacob Wheeler as the organizer and executor of the crime. Internal instructions provided for preparing for the legal filing of charges including kidnapping, illegal deprivation of liberty, and attempted murder. It remained to establish the motive. Given the nature of the records and the detention conditions of the victim, the analysts put forward the thesis that Wheeler was possibly obsessed or striving to completely control Emily Harper. At this point, there was no direct evidence of an acquaintance between Wheeler and Harper before her disappearance, but the entire logic of the actions pointed to personal motives. At the end of the day, the district attorney's office confirmed its readiness to initiate criminal proceedings, but decided to await the final analysis of all files to exclude possible staging or false accusations against the defendant. On the late evening of the 25th of October, technical specialists restored another photo archive from the hard drive, dated to the year 2010. The content was not yet published, but the examination of these files was deemed necessary before publicly filing charges. The investigation was approaching the final phase, and the investigators expected Wheeler to provide explanations regarding the direct evidence on the 26th of October. Thus, by the evening of the 25th of October, the investigation had a clear picture of what had happened. Harper's testimony was supplemented with new details that confirmed the fact of her long captivity in Wheeler's house. The police only had to find out why and when the kidnapper had decided to take the victim to the wasteland. Everything indicated that the solution was near and official charges would soon be filed. On the 26th of October 2016, the investigation team, together with the district attorney's office, completed the analysis of digital material that had been confiscated from Jacob Wheeler. Technical experts had restored photos and text documents found in an encrypted area of his hard drive. Some photos showed a room that was outwardly identical to the basement found under Wheeler's utility building. The dates on these images referred to the period from 2010 to 2014, which coincided with the presumed time when Emily Harper was in captivity. Moreover, individual shots showed personal items and furnishing details that Harper had previously described after regaining consciousness in the hospital. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the district attorney conducted a closed meeting with the sheriff and senior investigators, after which it was decided to officially arrest Wheeler and charge him with kidnapping, illegal deprivation of liberty, attempted murder. Wheeler's lawyer was informed of the need to appear for an interrogation, as well as the existence of an arrest warrant approved by the court of Mayfield County. The main evidence that made it possible to formulate the charges were the results of the DNA examination linking Harper to the basement, restored photo and text materials, and the fact that she was found alive in a specially prepared grave near Wheeler's house. At 11 o'clock, Wheeler came to the police station for a formal conversation with the investigators. The stady is based in Verda's structure, and it masterizes the subjectary office in the state. They're callful. And times is referring them, the filmer's room and time to be in the room, what son, and office Harper. After the investigators read him excerpts from the restored files mentioning specific dates and references to the need to eliminate the object, if there was danger of discovery, he stopped providing further explanations and invoked the Fifth Amendment. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Jacob Wheeler was officially taken into custody and brought to the county jail. According to an internal report, he remained calm and offered no resistance. Emily Harper's relatives were informed of the completion of the main phase of the investigation and the arrest of the accused. Wheeler's lawyer requested a medical examination suspecting a mental disorder in his client. The court ordered a corresponding examination, but this had no effect on the charges filed. On the evening of the same day, the district attorney's office issued an official statement emphasizing that the collected evidence confirmed the fact of Emily Harper's years-long illegal captivity in Wheeler's house. The statement said that Wheeler, sensing the danger of discovery, tried to get rid of the victim by burying her alive on the wasteland. expecting that this area would no longer be thoroughly checked. By the end of the day, it became clear to the investigators that Wheeler's actions were caused by a compulsive need to control the victim. The preliminary psychiatric examination revealed no signs of insanity. The main working version remained the hypothesis that Wheeler had prepared for the crime in advance by observing Harper and creating an underground shelter for long-term captivity. At this stage, the investigation officially moved to the stage of criminal proceedings. The prepared materials made it possible to classify Wheeler's actions as kidnapping, with aggravating circumstances and attempted murder. Emily Harper underwent further medical and psychological rehabilitation, and the doctors reported her gradual improvement. The case had reached its conclusion, with Wheeler facing the full weight of justice for his heinous crimes against an innocent victim. Internal documents of the investigation team described in detail the entire course of events, from Harper's disappearance in 2008 to her discovery in October 2016. The sequence of Wheeler's actions was traced with high accuracy, confirmed by material and digital evidence. It was precisely the accidental discovery of the grave by the new owner of the neighboring property, Robert Lawson, that became the key factor leading to Harper's rescue and the solving of the crime. By the end of the 26th of October, the investigation had completed the main search and investigative measures, and began final preparation for the court proceedings. There was no official data about possible accomplices at this time, and Wheeler named no other names. On the 27th of October 2016, the Mayfield County Sheriff's Office handed over the final package of materials in the Jacob Wheeler case to the prosecutor's office. Emily Harper was transferred from the General Hospital ward to the rehabilitation department. Her condition was assessed by doctors as satisfactory for further recovery. In the first half of the day, several officers came to the wasteland where Harper had previously been found to complete the final photographic documentation of the crime scene. During the inspection, the experts noticed an important detail. The plywood construction was located directly above an old, previously unknown drainage shaft. The experts suspected that due to the soil conditions, subsidence could have occurred over time, which would have blocked air access. The official expert opinion of the criminal investigators noted that if Robert Lawson had started earthwork only a few days later, Harper would not have been able to survive. Thus, her rescue occurred at the critical and very last moment. On the evening of the same day, the investigators studied the archive records of the police from 2009. On one of the video recordings, officers approached Wheeler's house for a preventive visit. The footage showed Wheeler inviting the policeman to have coffee, but the officers declined and drove away after a few minutes without entering the house or checking the basement. This episode remained in the memory of the emergency responders as a symbol of a missed opportunity. The official protocol of this visit contained only formal notes, without any suspicion toward the owner. At this stage, the investigation was factually completed and the case was handed over to the court. Jacob Wheeler awaited a series of court hearings. Emily Harper remained under the protection of law enforcement agencies and gave no public comments. In the meantime, the residents of Mayfield actively discussed why no one had previously noticed the suspicious underground work and how thoroughly the previous inspections of the property had been conducted. The final verdict was to be rendered by a jury. In the official documents of the sheriff's office, this case was described as unprecedented in terms of the duration of violent captivity of a person in the region. Experts emphasized that the complete picture could have been uncovered much earlier if investigators had previously paid more attention to the oddities in Wheeler's behavior or had used specialized equipment during inspections. The last lines of the police report contained a brief conclusion. The perpetrator believed that he could completely control another person's life while remaining invisible to the environment. Only accidental construction work and previously dismissed doubts led to the victim's rescue and the crime's discovery. Thus ended one of the most complex and sensational investigations in Mayfield County. But it inevitably made one think about how, in Isaac, many similar stories are hidden behind ordinary doors and plywood walls that no one is eager to check.